Life had this strange rhythm back then, predictable, almost comforting in its repetition. Mornings were filled with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the sound of my mom humming while flipping through the radio, and the distant thud of my brother's footsteps as he bounded down the stairs like he owned the place. Our house wasn't grand or anything, but it carried a warmth I didn't really notice until it was gone. You never think about those little background noises, those familiar smells, until one day they vanish and leave nothing but silence in their place. That I had my own quiet corner in that house, my room tucked away where I could retreat with my books or my journal. But no matter how much I tried to carve out space for myself, I was always aware of him, my brother. Don't get me wrong, he wasn't cruel or anything. In fact, he was the golden child, the one with the loud laugh, the easy charm, the stories that could fill an entire dinner table. He had this way of pulling the spotlight to himself without even trying. And me? I was the shadow, the listener, the one clapping in the background while everyone's eyes stayed glued on him at tea family dinners. I can still see it clearly, the way my dad's eyes would light up when my brother talked about his latest plans, while my own stories barely made it past the polite, "That's nice." It's funny how you can love people deeply and still ache for them to see you. I wasn't jealous, not exactly, more like invisible. But I had learned to live with that. I told myself that was just the dynamic. Every family has one star. And maybe I just wasn't meant to be it. Still, there were good moments. Nights when the four of us sat in the living room, a movie playing, the glow of the TV soft against the walls. My mom would fall asleep halfway through, my dad pretending he wasn't tearing up at some cheesy scene, and my brother tossing popcorn into his mouth with this smug grin. I remember laughing along, feeling for a second like I belonged right there, like maybe I wasn't so invisible after all. Those were the days I didn't question much. The days when loss wasn't even a word in my vocabulary. I had no idea how fragile it all was, how easily life can shatter. Looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention, soaked in every detail, even the ones that annoyed me. Because soon, the coffee smell, the laughter, the popcorn fights, they'd all feel like memories I'd give anything to live through one more time. But it's strange how some days start off so ordinary, you'd never believe they'd end up carving themselves into your memory forever. That morning was quiet, almost too quiet, now that I think about it. The kind of morning where the light slips lazily through the curtains, making you believe you've got all the time in the world. I remember the cool metal of the door handle when I left my room, the faint smell of toast lingering from breakfast, and the steady hum of life moving on, as if nothing in the universe was about to shift. The call came like a crack through that silence. I can still hear the vibration of my mom's phone against the kitchen counter, a sound that should have meant nothing. But when she picked it up, everything in her face changed. Her lips went pale, her eyes widened, but somehow glazed over at the same time. And then the words spilled out, words I can't even repeat without my chest tightening. Just like that, someone I loved was gone. No warning, no chance to prepare. The room around me suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. It's hard to describe the way grief first enters. It doesn't knock politely. It barges in, fills every corner, and steals the oxygen. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't even move at first. My hands went cold. My legs felt like they didn't belong to me. I remember staring at the floor tiles, noticing this tiny chip in the corner, as if focusing on that imperfection was easier than facing the enormity of what I'd just heard. And then came the noise. My mom sobbing into the phone, my dad pacing back and forth, muttering questions no one could answer. My brother's voice, sharp and panicked, filling the room like he was the one who had to control everything. Me? I stayed quiet. Too quiet. I didn't scream or collapse the way I thought I might. Instead, I froze, like if I didn't move. Maybe time would rewind. Maybe I'd wake up and hear laughter instead of silence. That I still remember the last Sunday before it happened. We had sat around the table, the four of us, eating dinner like always. I thought it was just another forgettable evening. I had no idea it would be the last time things felt whole. That memory replays in my head sometimes, mocking me with its simplicity. We laughed at a dumb joke my brother made. I rolled my eyes, but I laughed too. If I had known, I would have memorized every second of that night. But I didn't know. None of us did. And that day, the day everything changed, it split my life into two halves, before and after. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed, The world moved on like it hadn't, just crumbled beneath my feet. That's the cruelest part about grief. How normal everything looks on the outside while you're inside feels like it's on fire. The sun kept rising. Cars still honked outside our window. My phone still buzzed with meaningless notifications. And my family, they just carried on. At first, I thought maybe it was shock. Maybe they were holding it in, just like me. But the truth became clearer with each passing day. My grief didn't match theirs. Or maybe mine wasn't convenient for them. They had ways of compartmentalizing, of pretending that moving forward was the same thing as healing. I couldn't do that. I didn't want to do that. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one morning, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. My mom was busy scrolling through her phone, planning something mundane. My dad was buried in work emails, his laptop open like nothing monumental had just happened to us. And my brother, he had already started talking about his birthday coming up, casually dropping hints about what gift he wanted. I sat there, listening, and I thought, did anyone notice that I haven't slept in days? Did anyone see how I can barely breathe without breaking? The answer was no. They didn't. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't want to deal with it. It's easier to ignore the quiet ones, isn't it? The ones who don't scream or throw things. The ones who simply sit there, crumbling silently. Sometimes, I'd escape to my room and shut the door, pressing my forehead against the cool wood just to feel something steady against me. That's where my grief lived, behind closed doors, in the dark, in the scribbled pages of my journal. I'd write until the ink smeared with tears, hoping the paper could hold the weight of what no one else wanted to carry. And in those moments, I started to notice something I hadn't before. My brother, as loved as he was, became the center of their energy, even in grief. It wasn't that they didn't miss the person we lost. Of course they did. But their priority was making sure he was okay, comforting him, checking in with him, as if my pain was somehow less urgent, less visible, less worthy of their attention. That it's a strange kind of loneliness, sitting in a house full of people and feeling invisible. You start to question yourself. Maybe I'm too dramatic. Maybe my grief doesn't matter. Maybe I should just swallow it down like they want me to. But then, late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd lie in bed and feel the tears slide down into my pillow, and I knew, no, this mattered. I mattered. Even if no one else seemed to think so. Grief has its own timeline. It lingers, it claws at you, and it refuses to be boxed neatly into a week or two. But apparently, my family had other plans. Barely a breath after the funeral, the conversation in our house shifted, not to memories, not to healing, but to balloons, cake flavors, and party decorations. My brother's birthday was coming up, and somehow, that took center stage. That I remember standing in the living room, watching my mom untangle strings of colorful banners while my dad carried in bags filled with gifts. The smell of frosting from a cake order drifted in as my brother laughed over texts from his friends, already planning who would be there. And me? I stood there, clutching the hem of my sleeve, thinking, how are we talking about candles and confetti when I can still hear the echo of that hospital phone call in my head? It felt like the world had split into two versions. In theirs, life was marching forward, complete with party hats and upbeat music. In mine, the air was still heavy with loss, every corner of the house reminding me of what we'd lost. And the worst part? No one even noticed the dissonance. No one paused to say, hey, maybe this year we keep it small. Maybe this year we acknowledge the silence in the room. I remember one night in particular, the eve of the party. The kitchen counters were lined with trays of food, the balloons, already inflated, their plastic squeak filling the air. I slipped into the corner, pretending to help, but really just staring at the glossy reflection of the balloons in the window. They swayed back and forth, mocking me, like grief wasn't allowed here, like loss had been shoved out the door to make space for celebration. And I kept thinking, if the roles were reversed, if it were me who everyone seemed to forget, would things be different? Would anyone pause the laughter long enough to honor my absence? Or would they still light the candles, sing the songs, and carry on without a thought? That night, when I finally escaped to my room, I could hear the faint rustle of wrapping paper downstairs, the muffled sound of my family's voices preparing for joy. I buried my face in my pillow, the fabric warm and damp from tears, and I whispered into the dark, do I even exist to them right now? The celebration hadn't even started yet. but I already knew what it would feel like. A party draped over a grave, laughter layered on top of silence, joy that tasted bitter. The second it touched my tongue, the party came, just as they'd planned. The house was filled with noise, the kind of noise that rattles the windows and leaves no space for silence. Laughter bounced off the walls, glasses clinked together, and the smell of sugary frosting mixed with the sharp scent of candles burning. On the cake, to anyone walking in, it would have looked like a perfect celebration. But for me, it felt like I'd stepped into a foreign world, one that didn't belong to me anymore. That I stood there, surrounded by people, but it was like being trapped inside a glass box. I could see them, hear them, even force a polite smile. When someone glanced my way, but none of it touched me. My chest felt heavy, like every laugh was pressing down on me harder, suffocating me under its weight. I remember watching the flicker of the birthday candles, tiny flames swaying as my brother leaned forward, everyone's voice rising in song. And all I could think was, how are they singing when I can barely breathe? Flashbacks hit me in fragments. That night, in the middle of the birthday song, my mind slipped back to hospital hallways. That sterile, suffocating smell of disinfectant, the sharp beeping of machines, the way my mom's hand trembled when she held the phone. Then, like a cruel joke, I'd be pulled back to the present, where cheers erupted as my brother blew out his candles. Two realities colliding in my head, one drenched in grief, the other drenched in celebration. The clash was unbearable that I tried to disappear into the background. I nursed a half-empty cup of soda, standing near the corner like a misplaced piece of furniture. People brushed past me, laughing, talking loudly, spilling crumbs onto the floor, and not one of them seemed to notice the way my hands shook as I clutched that plastic cup. Not one of them saw that my eyes weren't on the cake, or the gifts, or even my brother. They were somewhere else entirely, stuck in the silence of lost. At one point, my mom brushed past me, smiling wide as she carried another tray of food to the table. For a second, I wanted to grab her arm, to whisper, "Don't you feel it too? Don't you miss them like I do?" But I didn't. I swallowed the words, let them burn down my throat like acid, because I knew the answer already. They had chosen joy. They had chosen distraction. And in doing so, they had chosen to leave me alone in my grief. It's a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being physically alone, but from realizing you could scream in a crowded room, and no one would even turn their head. I smiled for the photos, stood in the frame, clapped when the gifts were opened. But inside, I was screaming so loudly it felt like my own body couldn't contain it. And when the night finally ended and the guests trickled out, leaving behind torn wrapping paper and half-eaten cake, I felt emptier than ever. Loneliness doesn't always come in silence. Sometimes it comes wrapped in music, laughter, and the sound of everyone but you being heard. When the last guest left and the door finally clicked shut, the house seemed to exhale. The balloons sagged a little, the music had stopped, and only the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. My family busied themselves cleaning up, laughing softly about little moments from the party, stacking plates, picking up scraps of wrapping paper. They were tired, but satisfied, like the night had been a success. I couldn't take it anymore. My chest felt like it was splitting open, and if I stayed in that room 1 second longer, I knew I'd shatter in front of them all. So, I slipped away quietly, up the stairs, my footsteps light against the carpet. By the time I reached my room, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely turn the doorknob. The second the door closed behind me, it hit. Everything I'd been holding back for days, weeks, maybe even longer. The tears came hard, hot, and relentless. I sank onto the floor, pressing my palms against my face as if I could somehow stop the flood. But it wasn't just sadness. It was anger. It was rage. It was this fiery, choking question burning through me. How could they celebrate while I was breaking apart? How could they decorate, sing, laugh, as if our world hadn't just collapsed? I punched the floor once, the dull thud echoing in the quiet of my room. The sting in my knuckles grounded me for a second, but the storm inside didn't ease. I grabbed my pillow and screamed into it until my throat burned, the sound muffled but raw enough to leave me shaking. It wasn't fair. None of it was fair. Flashbacks kept slicing into me. The sound of my brother's friends cheering, layered over the silence of that hospital call. The glow of candles, overlaid with the dim, sterile light of grief. My mind couldn't reconcile the two, and it tore me apart from the inside. I remember curling up by the window after, my knees pulled tight to my chest. Outside, the night was still, the street lamps casting pale pools of light on the empty road. It was almost peaceful out there, so different from the storm I carried inside. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass and whispered into the dark. Why am I the only one still mourning? Why am I the only one who can't let go? There was no answer, of course. Just the faint creak of the house settling and the muted laughter of my family downstairs as they finished their cleanup. That laughter cut deeper than any silence could. It reminded me that my pain didn't fit their version of healing, that I was, once again, alone in how I felt. That night, I cried until exhaustion finally forced me to sleep. But I knew it wasn't the end. Something had shifted in me. A line crossed, a crack deepened. I wasn't just grieving anymore. I was angry, invisible, and desperately searching for someone, anyone, to notice how much I was drowning. After that night, something inside me hardened. It wasn't intentional at first. I didn't wake up the next morning deciding to pull away. But it happened all the same, quietly, like a bridge collapsing piece by piece until there was nothing left to cross. That I noticed it in the small things. The way I stopped sitting at the kitchen table for breakfast. The way my words became shorter, clipped, like I was conserving what little energy I had left. I used to fill silence with nods and MHMs when my family talked. Now, I just let the silence stretch. They didn't seem to notice, or maybe they didn't want it. My brother, of course, stayed at the center of it all. He was always surrounded by friends, by attention, by my parents' concern. They'd ask him how he was holding up, if he needed anything, if he was okay. I waited for the same questions to come my way, but they rarely did. And when they did, it was always in passing, like tossing a crumb to a bird. "You good?" they'd ask casually, already half turned away, not really wanting the answer. I learned to just say yeah, and leave it at that. What hurt most were the flashbacks. They'd sneak up on me in the middle of ordinary moments, like standing in the hallway, hearing my mom laugh at something my brother said, and suddenly remembering the sound of her sobbing during that call. Or passing the living room where my dad and brother watched TV, and instantly recalling the way my dad had stared blankly at the wall after the news broke. Those memories clashed with the present, and every time, I felt the divide grow wider. I tried, once, to bridge the gap. One evening, when the house had quieted down, I sat beside my mom and said softly, "I still can't stop thinking about them." She glanced up from her phone, gave me a faint smile, and said, "I know, honey, we all miss them," before going right back to scrolling. That was it. That was the conversation. I sat there, waiting for her to ask more, to open the door even a little, but the silence just swallowed me whole. After that, I didn't try again. It's strange. You can live in the same house, eat at the same table, breathe the same air, and still feel like you're on an entirely different planet. I'd pass them in the hallway and feel like a ghost, drifting through walls, unseen and unheard. The house hadn't changed, but the distance between us was immeasurable. Sometimes at night, I'd lie in bed and wonder if grief had built me a separate world, one where I carried the weight alone, while they managed to shed theirs in favor of normalcy. I wasn't sure what was worse, that they didn't notice my distance, or that they noticed and just didn't care enough to close IT. IT came on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing feels important, where you just drift through routines like you're half asleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I almost ignored it. But when I saw my aunt's name flash across the screen, something in my chest tightened. She never called just to chat. Her voice was formal, rehearsed almost, as she said, "We're gathering for the will reading this weekend. Everyone needs to be there." My throat went dry. A will. Of course there would be one. But somehow, hearing it said out loud made the loss feel final in a way the funeral hadn't. The funeral had been a blur of flowers, handshakes, and people telling me, "Stay strong." But this was business. Legacy. Closure, maybe. Or confrontation. That I hung up and just sat there, staring at the blank wall of my room, the faint ticking of the clock louder than it should have been. A dozen thoughts raced through my head. Would they have left me anything? Did they think of me in those final days? Or was I invisible to them too, the way I'd always felt in this family? Downstairs, I heard my brother's excited voice as he told my parents about the gathering. He spoke like it was some big event, something to anticipate. I wonder what they left me, he said, almost joking, but there was an edge of certainty in his tone, like he already knew he'd be the chosen one again. My parents chuckled, half-hearted, but I could hear it. The expectation, the assumption that he'd be at the center, as always. Me? I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The weight of it pressed too hard against my chest. I thought about the nights I'd spent crying alone, the way I'd scribbled every memory into my journal just so I wouldn't lose it. Would those moments mean anything in the end? Would the will reflect the bond I'd felt? Or would it erase me, just like everyone else seemed to? That night, I lay awake listening to the faint hum of the fridge downstairs, the quiet settling of the house, the muffled laughter of my family discussing logistics. The air felt heavier than usual, thick with anticipation. I kept thinking about the envelope, the papers, the voice of some lawyer reading words left behind. Words from the one person whose absence had hollowed me out for the first time in weeks. I felt something besides grief. It wasn't hope exactly, more like tension, curiosity, fear all tangled together. The will wasn't just about possessions. It was about recognition, about whether I mattered enough to be seen, even in death. The room smelled faintly of old wood and paper, that distinct, stuffy scent of offices that haven't been updated in years. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, my family pressed close together, me slightly apart. The lawyer shuffled papers at the desk, his glasses sliding down the bridge of his nose as he cleared his throat. That sound, the scraping, dry clearing of his throat, marked the beginning of something I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The silence before he started felt heavier than any words that came after. My hands were clasped so tightly in my lap, my nails dug half-moons into my skin. I kept my eyes on the edge of the desk, afraid that if I looked at my brother's smug expression or my parents' expectant glances, I'd break before the words even reached me. He began, and the voice was flat, detached, but the words weren't. Each sentence carried pieces of a life, fragments of love and intention. My brother's name came first, of course. Predictable. He was left something significant, something big enough that my parents exchanged approving nods, as though this confirmed what they'd always known. He was the chosen one. And then my name. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. The lawyer's monotone carried it so plainly, but inside me, it echoed louder than anything I'd ever heard. My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I braced myself for the bare minimum, a token gesture. But what followed stopped me cold. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about property. It was something personal, something only I would understand. A letter, a keepsake, something tied to the quiet moments I thought had gone unnoticed, those long afternoons spent together, those conversations I'd stored away like treasures. They had remembered me. They had seen me. The tears came before I could stop them, hot and silent, sliding down my cheeks while I stared at the desk. I didn't care if my family noticed. For once, their stares didn't matter. Because in that envelope, in that small gesture, was proof that I had mattered. That my grief wasn't invisible to the one person who counted most. I clutched the paper in my hands like it was air itself, like letting go would mean losing them all over again. The room blurred around me, my brother shifting in his chair, my parents whispering softly, the lawyer droning on with formalities. All of it fell away. For the first time since the loss, I felt, not whole, but acknowledged. Recognized that it wasn't about what my brother got or what anyone else received. It was about this single, undeniable truth. Even in their absence, they had chosen to remind me that I mattered, that I wasn't invisible, that love had existed between us. Even if no one else had seen it, I left that office holding the letter close to my chest, like a shield, like a lifeline. My family filed out ahead of me, talking among themselves, but I stayed behind for a moment. I wanted the silence. I wanted to breathe in that recognition just a little longer before stepping back into a world that had tried so hard to erase my grief. The days after the will reading felt strange, lighter, but not because the grief had vanished. No, grief never truly disappears. It lingers in the corners of your mind, in quiet moments, in the way a familiar smell or sound can make your chest tighten unexpectedly. What changed was the weight I carried alone. That letter, that keepsake, reminded me that I had been seen. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, I felt like my grief had a place in the world that I began noticing little things again. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the stairs, the way sunlight hit the hallway in the morning. The house didn't feel as cold, not entirely. I still sat in corners, still wrote in my journal, but there was a difference now. I could let myself exist in my own space without needing their permission or recognition. That my relationship with my family didn't magically repair overnight. There were still moments of tension, of misunderstanding, of the old pattern trying to reassert itself. But I stopped expecting validation from them. I stopped waiting for someone else to tell me I mattered. That recognition, I realized, had to come from me first. Sometimes I think back to the party, the balloons, the laughter, the invisible me. And now, I understand that it wasn't just about them choosing joy over grief. It was about me learning to carve my own path, to hold my own space in a house that didn't always make room for it. My brother remained my brother, my parents remained my parents. But I finally stopped trying to shrink myself to fit their narrative. I carry the letter with me, tucked away in a drawer, and I read it sometimes when the world feels too loud, when the past threatens to swallow me. It's not just paper, it's proof. Proof that love exists in ways that can't always be seen by everyone, but it can be known deeply by the heart. Moving forward doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean the grief goes away. It means living with it, letting it shape you, without letting it define you. I learned that I can honor those I've lost, acknowledge my own pain, and still step into light again. And that, more than anything, is the gift they left me. I can finally breathe in the quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I belong in my own life, fully, unapologetically, and seen, even if only by myself.